Had they believed and been conscious of their Lord, reward from God would have indeed brought them uh, good had they but known. These references are to a notion that is presented in the previous verse, and I want us to focus just on this last part, and then we'll get to our subject. That Satan had come to them, this is in 102, Satan had come to them and offered them sorcery, offered the people of Solomon sorcery. And they engaged, and it's because they were tempted to fall into the evil of Satan. But then the reminder here at the end of this verse is their engagement in this process of evil, that indeed they sold their own souls for a cheap price. They sold their own souls for a cheap price in this enterprise. Now, I want us to think about for a moment the issue of slavery. And that is that the scholars of Islam have talked about what are the necessities for human life. What are the necessities for human life in a subject called Maqasid al-Sharia. And in this science, there is a discussion of 5 necessities to be preserved to maintain human life. Those 5 things were systematically removed from the enslaved Africans during the transatlantic slave trade. And I would contend that even today, those who engage in, I think they call them in Mexico, coyote. The coyote.
The coyote, yeah, you're right.
He promises you that, if you just, work with me, I can secretly bring you into America and you will have a great, beautiful life. And you may have to do some things that are illegal, but it's okay because you're going to make money. And with that money, you'll be able to correct the wrongs that are being done to you and to other people. Just cooperate with me. The scholar said these 5 things that these type of slave masters introduce is, first, they say that the enslaved person is less than human. They don't have a soul like regular human beings, or like in the case of the African slave trade, that the African doesn't have a soul like the European. And therefore, not having a soul, then you can treat him like an animal. You see, when a person is considered by someone else as a human being, then if you abuse them, you feel as though you've done something to your own kind. But if you have an animal, say you have an animal in the field that you beat him, that animal that's being beaten in the field, no one says stop beating that animal. That's maybe the animal rights people now will get you, but hundreds of years ago, or if you go far away enough from the city, people do whatever they want to their animal. But the scholars of Islam said we must preserve the fact that we have a soul, that our soul has been placed in our bodies for a term, and that after a term it will be returned to Allah. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. From Allah, from God we come, and we will return to God one day. The notion that to make a person a slave, you have to communicate that they don't have a soul. This is what they call hifz al-hayat. Preserve your life or your soul or that essence that's in you. The second element of this slavery in the transatlantic slave trade was the loss of one's lineage, familia. That when a person was enslaved, they cut you off from your lineage. So the husband is taken in one direction. The wife is stolen and taken to another place. Maybe the husband will go to Louisiana, and the wife will go to Jamaica, and the child will be taken to Haiti and the Dominican Republic. This is what they used to do, to break up the familia, because they know that one of the elements of human life is to have lineage, from one parent to the next, to the next, to the next, to preserve the family. And so one of the ways in the transatlantic slave trade is that they broke up the families of the Africans. Now, Jesus, you know they're doing this today. Rashad, you know they're doing this today.
Yeah.
When you see the challenges to what they call family reunification, the husband is comes to America. Maybe he was documented for a while. Now he's undocumented, and they have a child, and then they say, no, you can't stay with your family. You have to go back, but the child can stay.
Oh, they're doing it in a different way, yeah.
Yeah, it's the same strategy,
right,
to dehumanize the person, because their only value is as an object, a commodity, like a slave.
Correct, yeah.
So the scholars say it is important to preserve your lineage, hifz al-nasl, to preserve your family tie. The human being, out of all of the creation of Allah, was the one from our forefather Adam, agreed that we would pass the message about God and God's creation and the way that this universe is organized, that we would be the Khalifatullah fil ard, that we would carry that message from one generation to the next. And so one of the ways that Satan will work to break that conveyance is to destroy the family. So you see it now today, where you have a lack of a sense of family unification or reunification. Or you'll have the economic system is such that the wife has to stay in one place and the husband has to travel to another place to live, and the family cannot stay together because they have to be sold for the value of their labor. The scholar said the next, hifz al-aql, to preserve your intellect, your intellectual legacy. It is clear that the Quran is encouraging individuals to learn, to become learned. They don't have to be a doctor or an engineer, but that they should seek knowledge, that they should understand what their Creator wants from them, through being able to have access to knowledge. And so the intellectual legacy of the enslaved African was made illegal. It was illegal to teach an enslaved African how to read or write. And there are many famous abolitionists, people who fought against slavery, like Frederick Douglass, who learned how to read secretly, because there is something about having knowledge. The Quran says, of those who are blind like those who can see, they are not equal. For those who have knowledge, are they like those who do not have knowledge? They are not equal. And so the system of oppression relies on keeping people ignorant. For many years, our brothers and sisters from Latin America, if they were not documented, they wouldn't allow their children to go to school. In a country that was made great on the backbone of public education, free education for everyone, that they would discriminate against children from Mexico and Central America if their parents were undocumented. Even now we have a challenge with the DREAM Act, that Congress doesn't want to pass the DREAM Act to say that children of people who are not citizens, although the children were either brought to this country against their will, they were just children.
Yep.
But now, having spent their whole lives in America, being educated in schools today, taking that chance that maybe the immigration will go after their parents if they go to school, many school districts have now said, no, we want these children to be educated, but only to a degree. And so their presence in America is challenged when they try to go to get higher education. And so again, the scholars of Islam have said that one should preserve one's intellect. It's not by accident. The first words of the Quran, Rashida, what?
Yeah, اقرأ, read.
Bismi.
بسم ربك الذي خلق.
So it's not just read anything. You see? It's not just read any garbage. It is to read in the name of your Lord. To read and to proclaim that knowledge that God has sent throughout the millennia to prophets and guides and messengers, and the last installment of that communication was sent to the last of the prophets. Jesus said that there will come one after me who will bring you into all truth. That one, people stopped looking for him, but he came, as the Bible makes references, he came born in the tent of Kedar. That he came in the area that the biblical scholars would call today Arabia. And he came saying that this is the message that has been sent to all of mankind throughout the millennia, to worship only one God and to follow in the example of the prophets, to establish justice, to establish peace, not to worship the prophets, not to worship Jesus as a God, but to reverence him as the Messiah and a messenger of God, to preserve one's intellect. This is an obligation that preserves our humanity. Should we fail in that, we run the risk of returning to a state like animals. If you look today at some of the behavior that you see people engage in. There is no way that they could behave this way if they had preserved that knowledge about what life is all about. You see fathers who don't take care of their children, mothers who abandon their children, abortion because you fear that you can't provide for the child, when Allah is clear in the Quran that don't kill your children because you fear for their sustenance. Their sustenance comes from God Almighty. But when you don't have that knowledge, you feel insecure. And then you'll do things, prostitution. You might do some things that you otherwise wouldn't do because you lack a certain knowledge that would strengthen you. The Prophet Moses, Musa alayhi salam, you know the narrative in the Quran where Musa says, God, you're talking to me, but I want to see you. And the question returns of, why do you want to see me? Is it because you don't believe in me? And his response is no, but having that knowledge would strengthen my faith. So people's knowledge strengthens their faith. And so preserving your aql, your intellect, your knowledge, is something that if you have that, it's harder for someone to enslave you, for Satan to make you a slave to the commercial life. And now, Rashan, do you know that the next one, scholar said that if you want to be free, you want to have a full human life, you should preserve what? It's a quiz.
If you want to be free, your nafs or you said your aql?
Your aql,
then
to preserve your
soul,
lineage,
your lineage,
to preserve your soul, your hifd al-hayat,
yeah,
hifd al-mal,
hifd al-mal,
to preserve what?
Your wealth or your money,
your wealth, your money.
Correct.
And so one of the ways that people are diminished is that they are robbed of the ability to pass on wealth from one generation to the next. And so in slavery, the enslaved African comes to America, is brought to America. They work all their lives, and at the end of their life, their children, wherever they are, don't have access to whatever property that has been accumulated by their parents. Now, in Islam, the right of the child is written into the Quran. If the father or the mother dies, the father should leave so much for his wife, so much for his children.
The world, the Islamic world.
Yes, and all of this is outlined in that same Surah Al-Baqarah. But the enslaved person, they say, well, if you have a dog and your dog dies, and they have a nice collar, what happens to the collar? Does the master go and look for the offspring and say, well, your father's dog died, and now we're going to give the collar to the oldest son? Right? This is what you would do if you find the oldest son, and you would give it to them, and then they would look after the family. That is, if you're thinking of them as human. If they're not human, then they don't have the capacity to pass on wealth from one generation to the next. There are many of our brothers and sisters from Latin America and Central America who come to America, economically oppressed, and then wind up working on a farm doing agriculture or other kinds of labor, but they're not able to accumulate wealth that they can pass it on to the next generation. And so when they pass away, they have a little or nothing to show for a lifetime of productivity. The reminder that each one of us should preserve some wealth that we can pass on to the next generation, and some wealth that we can spend in the service of providing for those who have less than we do. The last in these, they took from the enslaved Africans the freedom to practice their religion. Have the deen. Preserve your deen. Preserve your spiritual practice. They said, well, why should the enslaved African be allowed to practice religion when they don't have a soul? We covered that. That was the first point. They don't have a soul, then of what good to them is religion? And so they made it illegal for the enslaved African to practice his religion. Now, we've talked before about this connection between Islam and Spain and the presence of Muslims who came with Columbus. They brought with them that deen, that religion, but then systematically that religion was removed from them, because that is part of the transformation that makes one a slave. And so I'm going to review
they were even banned from their language, from their name, like you said, from
yes.
So many things,
because your name is part of your lineage.
Correct, yeah.
You see? And then, almost systematically, they said, okay, Hifz al-Hayat, don't let them preserve their soul or their honor, their dignity. Hifz al-Aql, to preserve their intellect. Hifz al-Nasl, don't let them preserve, don't have their families unified. Hifz al-Mal, don't allow them to transfer wealth from one generation to the next, and don't allow them to practice their religion. They replaced that with something that every school child now learns. What are the necessities of life that they teach in school today? What do people need? I'm asking you.
Education.
They tell you there are three things you need to be alive, to be human.
Right.
Food.
Yes.
Clothing. And shelter.
Yeah.
He said, wait a minute. Are those the necessities of life? For human life, food, clothing, shelter?
There's more to it than that.
So what happens...
By the way, Dr. Jesus is driving from Sarasota. I just received a message from him driving from Sarasota. I don't know if he's going to be able to call, but he say he's driving. So inshallah, we're going to continue.
We pray for Dr. Jesus, and because he's late, we're going to ask him to translate this in a delayed broadcast for our hermanos and hermanas.
Inshallah, we can just translate it and we'll put it in the website, inshallah. So
inshallah,
it's not an issue.
Yeah. So So whatever people miss today, they'll Dr. Jesus will put it out for us on, at least on the website. But this is insidious when you take people and you substitute the real necessities from this science, and you substitute it with food, clothing, and shelter. And so what then the succeeding generation are seeking is just to have better food, and to have better clothing, and to have better shelter. And so what they become are hyper consumers. You see people here, they say, well, you know, I'm successful. But how do they measure their success in this life? They're wearing fancy clothes, but they lost their lineage. They are trying to get money so they can have a bigger house, and they'll do anything to get it. Many of our young people get caught up in there's a big drug trade that's coming through the Mexican border. How is it coming? Because people have traded their soul in exchange for money, dreaming that they will have a big house and fancy clothes and luxurious food, when they have lost their morality. We see our sons and daughters engaging in activities, and you say, this is not the way we raised you. They said, yeah, you don't understand that for us to be successful here, we need money. We need to have a flash. We need to have bling. They still call it bling?
I'm sorry?
They still call it bling. We need some bling.
I'm not too familiar with that.
Bling. You don't know bling? Oh, man, bling, that's like for jewelry.
Jewelry, okay.
Yeah, big, you have a big, gold ring, diamond with gold tooth,
Oh, I see.
The gold tooth with a diamond in the tooth.
Diamond in the tooth, Allahu Akbar.
Yeah, this is because we have traded our lineage and our intellect and our wealth and our soul and our faith in God for these cheap things. And so the transformation, people may think that they are free, but many of us have sold our souls for a cheap price. It's time for us to return to a sense of what is important. And that means looking into the guidance that has been sent to all of mankind throughout the millennia, to begin re-educating ourselves and our children. I know that this program has a website that you can go to. What is it again?
It's Islam #4 Mankind. Islam #4 Mankind. Or in the Google search, you can just put Rashid, MRACHIDM, and that will take you directly into Islam #4mankind.com, inshallah.
I'm looking today in the news and hearing about people who were trying to go to California just to make some money for their families. They were kidnapped and then made to dig tunnels that would go under the border so that they could smuggle drugs across the border. And once the tunnel was discovered, the authorities arrested the people who were in the tunnels, and they said, we were taken as captives. We were slaves. And the people who they knew we were trying to go to America. They said, we can help sneak you in. And then they took them someplace, beat them up, and said, we tricked you. You thought you were going to America. Really, you're going to be digging this tunnel so that we can smuggle drugs into the United States underneath the border. The people who are doing this, they have sold their soul and then turn around and steal the souls of other people to treat them like animals. They said sometimes we work 12-hour days. And maybe they bring us food, maybe they don't. And at the end of it, if they're afraid that we can tell the authorities where the tunnel is, we may be executed. All for what? All for a few dollars that these people have sold their souls for a cheap price. How do we get past this? It means seeking and studying and learning about what the Almighty has for us. For those who, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, who have a relationship with their Creator and they follow it with deeds of righteousness. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ خَيْرُ الْبَرِيَّةِ, they are the best creatures. This is our mode, and you can't do it without knowledge. You can't do it without knowing. And if you are deceived by Satan, that there's a shortcut, that somehow or other you can escape the watchful eye, Sami'ul Alim, the one who hears everything, who knows everything. It's not going to happen. And to know that that one is guiding you and protecting you through every difficulty so that you can persevere to be successful in this life and in the hereafter. Unfortunately, now many of the enslaved Africans came as Muslims. Some say as much as 20 or 30% of the enslaved Africans were Muslims. But after hundreds of years of slavery, the sense of Islam was removed from them, their ability to transmit that from one generation to the next. One friend of mine said that this transatlantic slave trade, using this set of devices, these 5, that for the continent of Africa, West Africa, it was like having the tragic events of 9/11 every day of every week, of every month, of every year for 200 years. And so this devastation, and it was not much different. It was different, but not much different than the slavery that happened when the Europeans came to Central and South America. The only difference was that those people in Central and South America, they were still on their own land. They could look back and see the examples of their lineage. But Allah reminds us in the Quran that if you are caught by the lure of Satan, that Satan will make you forget Allah. And if you forget Allah, you will forget yourself.
Correct.
And so we have many countries that had great civilizations in South and Central America who now have sold their lineage for a cheap price. You know, I'm always amazed when I meet someone from Latin America or South America, Central America, whose name is Omar or Fatima, and say, wow, do you know what your name means? They say, no. When you'll see some people say, oh, Allah. You say, what did you say? They say, oh, it means, oh, God. You said, this is Arabic. You're talking about Allah. You don't even know it.
That's correct.
Because someone stole your lineage. They stole your akal. They have been stealing your wealth. And therefore you have not been able to pass it from one generation to the next. This is why I love this program. That it gives us a chance to talk about this message that was sent through all of the prophets. So someone might say, well, I'm not a Muslim. I said, no, this message was the same message that was sent to all of the prophets. Human beings are by nature free. You know, it's funny. Do you know what year slavery ended in the United States? You know what year it ended?
Not really.
You
got me off guard there.
I got you, man. Man.
You got me off on the.
All right. Well, let me ask. Do you know what amendment to the Constitution ended slavery? Because slavery was ended by an amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
Continue, Jazakallah.
The 13th Amendment ended slavery in America. That was in the year 1865.
Oh.
After 100 years of freedom, Islam became the fastest growing religion in America. But there is something about freedom that allows people to seek the way back to their Creator. So you had by 1965 the advent of Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, so many others who would return to the religion of Islam as many of their forefathers.
Correct.
That there is something about freedom that will allow people to seek out and practice again that faith that was sent through all of the prophets. We call it Islam, that natural way of living, but it requires that we seek knowledge, that we go back to look at our lineage, that we look at the sustenance, the mal, the wealth that God has provided for us, that we are grateful for it, we preserve it, and that then we pass it on to the next generation. That we practice faithfully every day, maintaining that connection with God Almighty. And the Quran describes the morning and the midday and the evening. And the Prophet ﷺ gave us 5 prayers that fit those times in the morning, the noon, the afternoon, the evening, and at night. Freeing ourselves from this hyper-consumerism that has enslaved many of us. better food, better clothing, and better shelter. Our challenge is to stop worshiping those elements of the creation and to return to the worship of the Creator. On Black History Month, I just want us to think about how this process was done to the enslaved African, but really it applies, this technique applies to all of us. We need to turn our attention back away from those things that make us just overgrown animals to the real humanity that God had intended for us. Rashid, do you have any comments or questions for me?
That's a really great subject that you chose, especially in this month while we're celebrating this Black History Month. And then I would like to how does it relate to the Latino, since this is this broadcast is designed or specific to the Latino. Someone might ask, how does it relate to the Latino? You mentioned it just briefly.
I want us to move past the issue of race.
Correct. Yeah.
That Satan uses these elements to divide and conquer.
Correct.
So the same techniques that were used in one way against Africans were used in another way against our Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters, where people will wind up doing things that negate their soul, but they trade it for money. In the border cities, where people come across the Tijuana, they come across from Texas to go down into parts of Oaxaca for their sin. And they have our young daughters sell themselves for a cheap price, as if they are not human. The farm workers are being sold into a kind of slavery.
Well, signal that we have 2 minutes, inshallah, closing remark, inshallah, we have 2 minutes left.
Right.
Continue to the
I would invite us all, alhamdulillah, to look at the example of the enslaved African, and then look into our own backgrounds in Central America and South America, how we are exploited the same way by the same Satan to cause us to turn away from this way of peace and serenity in belief in one God and the example of the prophet, and to sell our souls then for a cheap price. I thank everyone for listening today, and pray that the next time I'm on with you, that we will have some Diga Espanol.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khairan, Imam Johari Abdul Malik, from the director of the outreach Darul Hijrah. Jazakallah khairan. Thank you for taking time from your visit, and we thank our audience for tuning to your weekly radio program Islam for Mankind. You will find the recording of this show at islam4mankind.com. Thank you.
Escúchanos 24/7.